Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to our expert panel. It's going to take a look at consumer perceptions in the marketplace due to COVID, and also some brand new material related to how real estate can help Ontario's economic and confidence recovery. All of you know this, COVID has a major impact on our day-to-day lives, on business, and certainly in the real estate market. OREA has been doing, as part of our We Have Your Back campaign, a monthly pulse check on consumer attitudes in the marketplace. Are consumers looking for a different type of housing than they were pre-COVID? Are they looking to change maybe to a rural area or a cottage, or are cities still the big thing? How are consumers changing their own behavior around market timing, and what does it based on your demographic? Answers for that.
Hi, everyone. We've just lost Tim's signal there. We'll be back in a quick second. We're just going to get him reconnected. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Hopefully I'm back on the nature of Zoom conferences. All right, so we're going to also talk about some of these policy ideas and how we can help get Ontario back on track. More people on payroll, more confidence in businesses, and in return, more home buyers. So joining us right now, and I'll get to our expert panel after that to talk about consumer perceptions and these ideas, what they'll mean for you, for the economy, and what people think in our polling. We're going to start out with Stan Cho. Stan is going to be a great guest to have. He is the current MPP for Willowdale. He's also the parliamentary assistant to the Minister of Finance, so like the Minister of Finance's right hand. He sits on the Critical Jobs and Recovery Committee. That's the inner circle of cabinet that advises the Premier and government on what to do about COVID and the economy. And the big news, the best news about Stan Cho, he's a realtor. He's a broker. Well, he's had to put it aside to be an MPP, but he has been a realtor and broker for New Concept Realty, part of the Royal LePage team. So he knows what he's talking about as a realtor and as a member of provincial parliament. Stan Cho, thanks for joining our program.
Thanks so much for having me, Tim. Really appreciate being here.
Hey, and on behalf of the OREA team and audience, and you're still an OREA member, I think, right?
I sure am. Still pay my dues and happily tune into the market report every time.
Oh, great. Well, let's just say on behalf of the OREA team, you're one of the family. Congratulations. You and Carolyn recently got married. We wish you all the best, life of happiness and prosperity and good health as a couple, and do what your mom does and as a family.
Well, thank you very much, Tim. I really appreciate that. I forgot the ring today, but I'll tell you, this thing is heavier than I thought, especially around the ankles, but thank you.
Let me ask you this off the top, because I had the pleasure of knowing you before you got into politics. I sought your advice when I took on my job as CEO of OREA back in 2016. So what's it like? I mean, you've made the change. You've always been interested in public policy. How does it feel to be going from being a realtor broker to becoming an MPP and a member of the Jobs and Recovery Committee?
Yeah, Tim, it's an excellent question. It's been a total whirlwind. There are aspects of my previous life I do miss. You know, when I first saw the annual salary for an MPP, I thought it was a monthly paycheck. It is not. And certainly the financial freedom that can come with a successful career in real estate is one aspect that I miss. But I still consider it an honor to show up to work every single day to help the people I serve, and especially now during such uncertain times with the pandemic. And, you know, I've said this before, only 3,000 people or so have gotten to do what I get to do in our province's entire history. And it's an even bigger honor that I got to go through Treasury Board to the Ministry of Finance in a rookie MPP in just 837 days. I've seen how government financing works, and a lot of people elected members who serve don't get to see that over their entire career. So every day still continues to be a real privilege for me, and the day that stops, that's the day I'll come back to real estate.
And before we get into the policy options, I know you're looking at a bunch of things as part of the cabinet committee. I just want to ask you one more question. Like, we've got over 1,000 people watching live right now, and this will be streamed later. They're in real estate, but obviously they're interested in, making Ontario a better place, making their community stronger. Otherwise, they wouldn't be watching this video. So if somebody made a transition from real estate to politics, what's your advice? Is it worth it? Would you encourage us to do so, or have you had enough?
No, absolutely not. Don't do it, especially in Willowdale. Don't ever run. But it's absolutely. I mean, the passion that's comes from the real estate sector and knowledge is what should form government policy. And in fact, that's one of the reasons I ran for office, because in my life as a broker and running a company of a few hundred salespeople, I felt that there was a disconnect between what we were seeing in the real estate sector and what laws were being introduced. And one example I'll pick on is the 2017 Fair Housing Plan. There was nothing fair about that for the market. And it was one of the reasons I decided to put my name forward for public office. And I'm glad to say that some of the things we're working on are absolutely doing the right thing for the marketplace. I'll have you know, our government's working on the broadband issue as well. It's a priority for us.
I'm actually in Toronto too, so I apologize. So look, let me ask you this. So one thing I know that you cared deeply about from our earlier conversations, one of the reasons that you were motivated to run for public office was maintaining affordable homeownership, the ability for that next generation to find a place to call home. How does it feel now that you're a couple of years in? Do you feel like you've made a difference in that regard? Like, what would you put up there on your shelf where you've already had an impact, and what's left to do?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I feel really great about the steps we've taken so far, but as everyone who's watching will know, the issue of affordability in our province did not surface overnight. This has been decades in the making, and I know that firsthand from the industry that I was in, but from the riding I represent. Willowdale is an area of our province that has hit its provincial growth targets for 2041, and it did that several years ago. And that's a story across many parts of this province, and we're seeing population growth spill well over the Greenbelt and to every corner of this province. As I've toured for budget consultations, it's amazing how housing has come up from every corner, from Windsor to Kenora to Smith Falls. It's a challenge everywhere in our great province, and it's not because it's been so long in the making. It's not going to be fixed overnight, unfortunately. And what we have to do is look at the underlying fundamental root causes of the affordability crisis, not look to Band-Aid solutions that may sound good as an announcement, but do actually nothing to address that core problem. And that core problem is that imbalance between supply and demand. And that's why we have that missing middle. And that's why we have the unaffordable prices. And so our government has taken significant steps to removing the conflict that exists in the system so we can get the supply of housing out there and to make sure that affordability problem will resolve itself down the road.
Let's talk about the economy a little bit. So everything was shut down for good reasons back in the spring. We've seen in real estate some pent-up demand coming into the system. Most of our boards across Ontario, in fact, all are reporting a pretty good market. From your perspective, Stan, as the Parliamentary Assistant Minister of Finance, where do you see the economy going through the fall and into December? And what do you think, with your real estate hat on, what's that going to mean for the market?
Well, we'll start with the real estate end of things, Tim. And very early on in the pandemic, I did a series of roundtables, one of which we had Royal LePage Canada on. And we talked about the CMHC's predictions then about the doom and gloom for the housing market. And I know the CEO, Phil Soper of Royal LePage, and I joke about how they would get that prediction wrong, as sometimes they do. And they did. And we know that they would, because construction and housing has been a huge driver in our economic recovery because of that supply-demand imbalance that we spoke about. The fact that Ontario remains one of the greatest destinations for people to move to from around the world. It's a world-class province with world-class cities, and you can't fault the people of the world for wanting to live here. And so we have to remember that as we move forward. However, the sort of challenges that we face in the economy have not been equally felt. And when I look to the tourism sector and I look to the hospitality sector, these are industries and sectors that have been incredibly hard hit. And the recovery path will be longer and there will be more casualties. Ontario is also in a very unique position where we were several months behind other jurisdictions for when the pandemic hit. And that's meant that we can't compare Ontario entirely the same to other jurisdictions around our country and around the world. But it also puts us in a situation where we're able to see what's worked in other places, what hasn't worked, what measures we might want to introduce in Ontario. And so moving forward, it's going to take all hands on deck, as you hear the Premier often say, but we are confident that we will be able to return to that prosperous Ontario that we all knew before COVID-19.
So really, there's been three stages. Stage one was the shutdown of the economy to keep people safe. Stage two was a gradual reopening, and the premiers put greater fines, more restrictions on public gatherings to stop further spread. But basically, the restrictions are unwinding. Stage three is to be around economic stimulus, getting people back to work, renewing confidence. So how does the government make those types of decisions? What goes on the plate for a future budget, for example, or economic update? And then how would a group like OREA get those ideas to be part of that menu?
That's such an important question, Tim. And as we move through this pandemic and towards economic recovery, we can't take stats like the fact that Ontario is back to 95% of its pre-pandemic GDP at face value. We have to remember that those sectors, as I mentioned, have suffered unequally. And so this is important work being done through the Jobs and Recovery Committee, as you mentioned, but also through the budget consultations, which we're going through right now. And those budget consultations are going to form our November budget coming up, as well as the budget in March of 2021. These will be very important budgets in that recovery plan. And everybody on this call and all the members and everybody watching at home can also contribute to those budget consultations by going to ontario.ca/budget consultations. And the Premier and the Minister of Finance have been clear that everything is on the table when it comes to recovery. But we must remember that we have to invest those tax dollars wisely for the recovery plan, and that we must be investing in the sectors that are hardest hit potentially first.
I'll say to folks watching at home, we're going to walk through some of the ideas OREA is presenting to government. We'll have Nick Nanos talk about how they have pulled. I'm going to take lots of questions from you as well during our panel. But Stan, a couple last questions. You'll be my focus group on this. So here's some of the ideas that we have. I'm doing the top two dogs, so to speak. I did have a chance to talk to the Premier this morning, and now Stan Cho. So I think I've covered the major bases here, right? So number one on the list, it's like if we really want to get the economy going, we believe that real estate can be that economic engine. And if you do a land transfer tax holiday, say for 6 months, that will bring more people into the market. Those who are hesitating may come into the market and increase supply. And you know from your time as a broker, there's no better spending to get the economy going again than when people buy or sell a home. Do you think that's something we should put on the table? What's your gut reaction as somebody who lives in both worlds of real estate and provincial politics?
Yeah, Tim, and I think all ideas such as that one should be submitted and put forward. They will be well sort of triaged at the Ministry of Finance, and everything is absolutely on the table. And real estate is crucial. I mean, housing is that one sector of life that affects everyone from the very rich to the very poor. It doesn't care what religion, race, gender you are. I mean, this is something that affects every single one of the 14.5 million people in this province. And so we appreciate any ideas you will have. And what I encourage your members and your organization to do is to submit those ideas with that eye to recovery of helping the sectors hit hardest. And perhaps that is the missing middle. Perhaps that is the lower income or the affordability issue. And certainly any and all advice will be very much valued, as this is a very, very important budget we have coming on or before November 15th.
Another thing we picked up in our polling, and we're bringing an idea to help address it, is, I mean, we've all been cooped up in our own homes for so long. We've had so many conversations with our family, our spouses are in our own heads about what we like or don't like. Do we need a home office? Do you want, grandma to move in with the family? So a home renovation tax credit we thought would help improve the quality of homes. It can help people when they're buying a home, fix it up and help make that more affordable. And really, it'll get a lot of jobs going around in construction and retail. So how's that one strike you?
Got unmuted there. If I had $1 for every time I heard that on a Zoom call, but I know the federal government had a similar program back in 2009, and so the question for us at finance will be: is this economic recovery similar to that one? Are we affected in the same sectors as we were 11 years ago? And everything will be well litigated here, and to see where is the best value for money when it comes to the recovery plan. And we have to balance against the shortfalls in revenue that we're feeling at all levels of government as well. And so we'd appreciate help with that, and your ideas would be absolutely welcome in that process.
And the last one I'll ask you about, and I know you've got to get back to the meetings and the legislature being in session, and that's a concept called opportunity zones. They've worked in the United States and United Kingdom, and other countries, where basically for areas that are really hard hit, high unemployment, high crime, you have a lowering of taxes, fees, you speed up the approval process, less red tape to help with job creation, and then housing will come as a result of that. Has that been something that's at the table, or do you think it has a chance of, well, passing to the next stage?
Yeah, and certainly in many ways, the topic has come up, and it's come up in a number of different ways. And one of the sort of the catalyst for that conversation has been the changing workplace. And I'm here down at the Ministry of Finance, and as I take a walk for lunch, I notice how empty the food courts are and how much the commercial landscape has changed. And we have to be aware of that in government. Is there an opportunity, or is it the right measure to take to adjust to that changing workplace? Is this an opportunity to look to more rural areas, challenged areas that maybe don't have as much employment as the downtown core did? And those are the very discussions we're having, looking to other jurisdictions, what's worked, what's not. And so absolutely, to answer your question, we are open to those types of ideas through your members, and even if it's not through the formal process, even the individual members through the website portal that I mentioned. So looking forward to that. Some of the best ideas in the recovery plan have come from the general public. And once again, the Premier said it best, we're in this together. That means we'll get out of this together.
Well, Stan Cho, MPP Willowdale, Parliamentary Assistant to the Minister of Finance, broker and realtor yourself. Really appreciate you joining our program here on Consumer Perceptions. I'll just give you an update too, and those watching at home. So we'll be meeting with MPPs of all parties to talk about these ideas, realtors from across Ontario. So you'll be hit up. Maybe they've already hit you to the TREB board. We'll want to talk to you about these ideas as well. And we'll also encourage our realtor members, just like you said, Stan, to individually contact their local MPP to push these ideas. We want to make sure that that dream of homeownership becomes a reality for more people. And in so doing, we get more people back to work, get our economy moving again, and help support, all the efforts of the parties in Queen's Park to do so. Fantastic. I'd like to say last thing too. I do hope that you'll inspire more realtors and brokers to run for public office. It just is awesome to have somebody like you there pushing for ideas like expanding home ownership. Thanks, Dan, for all the work that you do.
Thanks for having me, Tim. I really appreciate it.
You bet. All right, folks, we'll be back momentarily with our expert panel and the latest update on what consumers think about the market. Check this out. All right, thank you very much. That was awesome. I hope you folks enjoyed that. I just think it's great, first of all, to have somebody who knows the business there at Queen's Park, because you can make all the presentations you want, you can lobby like crazy, but then the doors close and it's just the elected officials in there. So I hope we'll see more people like you running for office and being like Stan Cho, whatever party you support, make a huge difference when it comes to issues around housing and home ownership. Okay, so next up, I want you to see this data presentation momentarily and then send me your questions. Last time we did this in July, I think we got through about 12 or more questions from viewers at home. So get the keyboard ready, send in your questions. I've got my own, then I'll get to yours and we'll do a whole bunch of them. Our panel here is going to talk about our latest take on what consumers are perceiving in the real estate market in this world of COVID. We've been running monthly polling since back in June. We've got the latest now for the end of August, and we're going to keep doing this for a little bit too. We also have polled on these big ideas that I talked to Stan Cho about. What's the average person think about a land transfer tax holiday? Do they like a home renovation tax credit? And do they think this will actually get the economy moving again? That will help us for meeting with MPPs, and I want you to check it out and get your opinion on that as well. As part of that research, we teamed up with Canada leading consulting firm Strategy Corp. I've known the folks there, and the gentleman who's going to be on the panel I've known for a long time too. Big brain, talented and a handsome fella. In addition, helped write this paper, so he knows what government will react to. There's basically 3 buckets in our paper that's called Rebuilding Ontario, a framework for recovery. Number 1 is COVID-19 recovery and job creation. So addressing, for example, the uneven playing field when it comes to business, education, taxes, addressing problems with landlord-tenant board as well, because we've got significant developing problems in that area. Number two is housing as the engine to drive Ontario's economic recovery. Land transfer tax holiday, home renovation tax credit, they're in that bucket. The third one is the long term. Let's think about increasing housing supply and choice in the marketplace. What changes can we make today to make an impact in the long run? Okay, so those are the boxes: consumer perceptions, policy ideas to get Ontario moving again. All right, here's our panel. Melanie Piche, you all know, she is the leader of the Brel team in the Junction in Toronto, Prince Edward County, and across the province, a top Toronto realtor, a very strong voice and outspoken individual. Joined us last time, did a hell of a job. Her focus always in helping others get top dollar for their home. Melanie, welcome back to the panel. I talked about Mitch Davidson earlier. He's the Executive Director of Strategy Corp Institute for Public Policy and the Economy. He helped write this paper. He just recently left the province after years of public service. And Nick Nanos, the president of Nanos Research, one of Canada's leading pollsters. You've seen him on CTV. You've seen him in the Globe and Mail, Bloomberg News, and most importantly, you've seen him in the AREA Productions. Nick has done an update on consumer perceptions and the policy ideas. Get your questions ready. We'll start with Nick Nanos, and then we'll come back to the panel. Nick, take it away.
Thanks a lot, Tim. So what we're going to do is unpack the latest data that we collected on behalf of the Ontario Real Estate Association. It includes 2 studies. I expect the first slide to pop up shortly, but it includes 2 studies. One of people who expect to be or who are currently in the market, and then another study of the general populace, right? What we wanted to do was basically to get a grip on what was popular or unpopular in terms of potential initiatives, and then also to keep a pulse on what's happening in the marketplace. So with that, let's go to the first slide. Am I supposed to go boom, boom? Good. Sorry, am I supposed to see the slide? I won't see the slide. Cool. So let me open up my section of the slide. Sorry, folks, I thought I'd be able to see the slide and run the slide. You might be surprised to know that not all the slides are in my head or all of the stats. So we're going to do a quick whip through. So the good news is for everything here, it is on the OREA website. So for all of you data junkies, what I suggest that you do is go to the OREA website and download everything. What's clear is that what you can see is that when it comes to the housing market, it's still strong. Attitudes are still positive. They might not be as positive as they were in the pre-pandemic, but they're still pretty good. You can see over 6 in 10 Ontarians who are actively in the real estate market say that buying home today is a very good or good investment. You know, when we look at where people want to live, you know, whether they want to live in suburban Ontario, rural Ontario, or downtown Ontario. You know, we talked about in our first wave of tracking back in June on this particular issue, we talked about how things like the suburbs have increasing appeal, and rural Ontario. It's not a one point or one data point phenomenon. We can see that the trend that we captured at the beginning of June still is in place, and that there's still a significant proportion of Ontarians that see both the burbs and rural Ontario as being very appealing, while the downtown livelihood is not as strong. And you know, when we talk about open houses, and this is actually critical for realtors, you can see a shift in the numbers. That compared to June, you can see now in August, the proportion of Ontarians that are in the market who are comfortable or somewhat comfortable with a virtual open house, you can see on the rise. It's basically up 15 percentage points since June. So this is actually quite significant. This also shows that over time, as an increasing number of Ontarians use Zoom and Microsoft Teams as part of their experience in their day-to-day lives and with work, that level of comfort is converting into what I'll say the real estate experience. And, it shouldn't really be surprising that a strong majority of Ontarians say that housing is important to the economy, because for most average people, their single largest purchase, their single biggest investment, the thing that they are transfixed about has to do with the value of their home, either whether they're in the market or whether they want to get in the market. And when we think about the home and what people want to do from a renovation perspective, you can see that a pretty strong 3 out of every 4 Ontarians support or somewhat support having some sort of renovation tax credit. And when we kind of ramp up to a more specific tax credit, you can see the numbers really pop and jump when they're more focused, either on helping seniors age in place or some sort of green renovation. So, the key takeaway here is that although there's a significant level of support for renovations in general, once they're more targeted, either for seniors to age in place or something related to kind of a green angle, the numbers for support for that actually rocket. And you can see also the good news is that 6 out of every 10 Ontarians say they would take advantage of a home renovation tax credit within the next year, which means that if the government decided to go down this particular path as one of its public policy options, as recommended by the Ontario Real Estate Association, it could directly inject some stimulus right into the market and into the economy. And the other thing is that when we're looking at this whole concept of a land transfer tax holiday, something like this could actually accelerate people getting into the market, especially if you're a younger person with, you can see 20 plus 25%, 45% of Ontarians that are under the age of 35 saying that it's likely to accelerate this. So you have to think of stimulus and tax relief as being 2 key levers that the provincial government can use. And this whole idea of a rebate for first-time home buyers being a significant kind of spur for the market potentially. You can see 3 out of every 4 Ontarians think that it would have a positive or somewhat positive impact on the market. So this being another key initiative that, if implemented, could have a definitely positive impact on the market. And setting aside initiatives from the government that could either stimulate or provide tax relief, we also kind of unpacked how Ontarians felt about the whole landlord-tenant relationship. And it's a very sensitive topic. What's interesting is that you can see that 3 out of every 4 Ontarians are good with landlords removing problem tenants for reasons other than non-payment of rent. So there's a pretty decent level of support for Ontarians to ensure or allow landlords to continue to do what they need to do, that if there's a problem tenant, that they're okay with removing them. And also a pretty decent level of support for temporary assistance for landlords themselves, in terms of when it comes to supporting landlords with tenants who can't afford to pay rent, with about 3 out of every 4 Ontarians being on board with that. And when we're talking about the supply, you can see that what Ontarians are looking for is the government providing leadership on construction of new homes around major transit stations, with, you can see a significant proportion, very comfortable majority, thinking that the province not only needs to focus on this, but use it as a potential strategy in order to help, what I'll say, the supply problem. And when it comes to the supply problem, the whole idea of accelerating the redevelopment of surplus lands has a very high level of support, with 8 out of every 10 Ontarians in the general populace agreeing or somewhat agreeing that this should be a top priority for the government. And the key takeaway, real estate can be the key to the economic recovery. People are looking for leadership from the province of Ontario and are open to new ideas in order to stimulate things. So with that, Tim, I'll pass it over to you.
Fantastic, Nick. A great job as always. So let's go to the panel. I want to ask questions about consumer perceptions and then some of the public policy ideas we're putting on the table for Ontario's economic recovery. And again, folks at home, please do send in any questions that you have. We got through a bunch of them last time. Love to ask your questions as well. Okay, let's start with Melanie Pichet, broker for Brell Team. Melanie, the numbers that Nick walked through there on open houses showed that back in June, 66% of people were comfortable. Now it's up to 81% by the end of August. Does that surprise you in any way in terms of how consumers are reacting to health and safety in the marketplace?
Not really. I think between June and August, we got comfortable with a lot of things and reading restaurants and doing all sorts of things. So I wasn't surprised to see that. I think buyers are eager to see houses as they always have been. I don't think we see that same eagerness when it comes to sellers and their realtors. I think, inviting 50 people who are unqualified and potentially neighbors into your home isn't a lot of things, something that a lot of sellers are looking to do. And I think one of the nice things coming out of the pandemic is a lot of people have experimented with different ways of accomplishing the same goals as of an open house. And it's working. So I know at our brokerage, we did not bring back open houses. We found other ways to connect with potential buyers. And I don't think our sellers are suffering. But I think ultimately everyone has to make their own decisions. And that really depends on what's going on in individual communities. And if I was in Toronto, I wouldn't want to be doing open house right now as case counts are increasing.
And again, we're doing monthly polling of consumers' perception. So this question to Nick Nanos. So Nick, we saw that people had an increased interest in living in rural and suburban areas, not so much in urban areas. That trend has continued now for an additional month. So Nick Nanos, do you think this is going to be something permanent, or is this just people making a decision they were going to make down the road, making it today?
Well, what is permanent in this crazy COVID world? I think, I would hazard to say for the next year, for sure. Afterwards, who knows? But, what's interesting is that, there's the one thing that everybody agrees upon, doesn't matter whether you're young, old, male, female, where you live, the suburbs. Everybody seems to agree on the burbs having more appeal. What it looks like in the numbers for the downtown areas, more appealing for young people, for the rural areas, if you're over 55, greater appeal. But I think for the next year, for sure. After that, Tim, no bets are on, because who knows what's going to happen with the pandemic.
And just a follow-up, Nick, so when you look through the demographics based on age, is there a difference between young people and people closer to retirement, people who currently live in the city rural areas, or is it across the board?
Well, it's on the suburban front, it's across the board for sure. No big statistical differences, but there are big differences depending on how old or young you are on both the rural and the downtown front. So with rural areas being more popular among Ontarians over 55, and downtown more of a young vibe, right? Under 35, looking at that. So we shouldn't say that nobody's interested in living downtown. It's just there's still a lot of young people that are into that downtown environment.
And it's even more of a vibe, and it's a young vibe, Nick. Mitch Davidson from Strategy Corp. Mitch, again, thanks for the work you did in writing this policy paper for OREA. When you look at the polling that Nick Nanos just talked about, Mitch, how does this actually work? Does it influence decision makers, or is it just entertaining for us?
No, I think the first part is what Nick said, is how permanent is this, for sure. And so as government goes to consider their options, are they doing something that's temporary in nature or more long-term? But I would say that this will have a real impact on, the Ontario government was already concerned specifically about rural Ontario, and not so much necessarily about suburban's growth opportunities, but for real rural Ontario, it's been on a declining trend. I always say this one stat that seems to blow a lot of minds, and that's since the 2008 recession, 87% of all jobs that were created in Ontario were created in the GTA or in Ottawa. And so if you live in Peterborough, Barrie, or somewhere more rural than those places, because obviously those are sort of your suburban communities, but if you live in true rural Ontario, you've been going one direction in terms of economic growth, and it hasn't been the right one. So this poses a really unique opportunity to try to get some new life, get some new families, get some new businesses to move to these places, and to really sort of curb that negative growth and turn those communities' futures around. So I think the Ontario government would be poised to look at this pretty seriously, and I think all signals so far show that they're going to do so.
So Melanie Peachy, I want to ask you a question about the different policies that Mitch put in his paper and how you think average people would respond. But before I do, you're back in the panel, you did a great job last time. You've seen 3 months of data on consumer perceptions. Anything in there surprise you, or anything that you disagree with?
No, I mean, I think it's very reflective of what we're seeing on the ground with our own clients as well.
All right. And how are you feeling about the market all in all, whether it's your business in Toronto, Prince Edward County, or other areas?
I mean, I think, we're still seeing lots of lifestyle changes and lots of movement. I think, you know, all the realtors on the call know how busy most of us have been, but we are starting to see some way too many listings with condos in Toronto. So I think, you know, we are in many ways living in a bit of a false economy that has the potential to catch up with us if we don't see, you know, the Ontario government take some steps to support it, because we're starting to see the cracks.
Yeah. So that's a good way to segue to this question then. What's your gut reaction? You're on the streets every day, you're working hard, you're not in the policy realm, but if Premier Ford talked to you and said, okay, you actually know what you're talking about, you're running a business, which of those ideas do you think will create the most activity in the real estate market and help with spin-offs from the broader economy?
I think that the group struggling the most right now is that there's the first-time buyers. So I love the idea of, you know, the land transfer tax holiday is something that's time limited that will spur them from sitting and waiting, which is what a lot of people are doing right now. And I think that's what we need to do to support that condo market in Toronto as well, because we don't want to see that go down, because it could obviously spiral into other parts of the market. So I love anything that supports the first-time buyers. I love the idea of a tax holiday, because the challenge is getting that down payment and the closing costs together. That's what keeps people up the market.
Oh, for sure. And that land transfer tax is punishing, especially in the city of Toronto. It's going to discourage a lot of activity. Okay, so again, folks at home, if you have any questions, please do send them in. I'm glad to ask the panel of the polling or in general at real estate markets when it comes to government public policy. Mitch, I'm going to go back to you. Again, you had worked as the advisor to the Premier in the policy development, so the head of policy. You're now with Strategy Corp running their research institute, and you penned this paper. So you see the results that Nick Nanos brought in, that a lot of people believe that real estate is still a wise investment. Over 90% of those surveyed in early September said that real estate plays a critical role in Ontario's overall economic recovery. So what's really at risk here when you look at some of the things in the dynamic, I guess, in the atmosphere, the mortgage deferral program, what Melanie said about concerns around the condo market? What's at risk if the government doesn't take action?
Yeah, well, there's really one big risk here, which is that the financial assistance programs like CERB and the mortgage deferrals, they were supposed to be and they were designed to be temporary in nature. When they were going to expire, the thought process originally was when they expired, the pandemic would be over and people would be going back to a fully functioning economy and we'd have nothing to worry about. And obviously, we're 6, 7, 8 months from the start of the pandemic, and this thing is not going to be over anytime soon. And so as these programs expire and you're supposed to go back to the private sector for your financial assistance, for your income, to make money to pay off your mortgage, that might not be available to you. There's a number of different sectors that haven't recovered yet. So the government's really in a tricky spot here where it needs to make sure that it's watching what happens out there, because if people their mortgage deferrals expire and they now no longer can afford to stay in their home, you may see a rush of supply hit the market. And if as much as 2% of the current housing portfolio in the province were to hit the market at once, that's supposed to cause a crash. On the contrary, what Melanie said, the other side could be true, which is maybe people have some money coming in, but they're uncertain about their situation. So they're not making that move. They're not getting a bigger home. They're not having that next kid because they're just not sure about their personal situation or the long-term effects of their employment. So you really, as a government, the key here is to watch and react, but react quickly. You can't sit on your hands and just hope that it corrects itself. We need to make sure that we get that careful balance that Stan mentioned of supply and demand. And so using some of these policy levers that we put forward, they can do that once they're able to see the true impact of the expiry of these temporary assistance programs.
All right, Nick, so Mitch points out that there's a lot at risk here, that with the mortgage deferrals, the end of the public assistance programs, things can go sideways when it comes to the economy. The government will need to do something to stimulate and replace those programs. So you're an awesome data analyst. You've proven that by your polling, but you've also got really good political instincts. You can look at the numbers, but then you can recommend to government what's actually going to make a difference. When you look across the array of ideas in the paper Mitch has done for AREA, Nick, what jumps out at you as something that you would whisper in the Premier's ear, take this one or take this one, it'll make a big difference in the budget?
Well, you know, I think that the first message has to be introduce something that is sustainable over a long period of time. To think that this is going to be a short-term scenario or short-term fix is probably not good politically. You have to think of things that remove obstacles from home ownership in kind of the real estate market. So I've put two big buckets. The one bucket being tax relief, and this has to do with the land transfer tax. And the other one is tax stimulus, which has to do with the renovation. And it looks like Ontarians are good with stimulus in terms of renovations when they're highly targeted in the green for green renovation and seniors. So think of it this way: stimulus with a purpose and relief to spur behavior. I would say those are the things that he should be looking
So
at.
Melanie, when you think about your clients that are thinking about the market, but not in the market as of yet, they're watching how things settle. I'm sure you've got a number of those. Do you agree with Nick? Would a land transfer tax holiday actually bring them into the marketplace, or will they still take a wait and see attitude?
I think it will. I think, that combined with the low interest rates right now, I mean, it would be crazy to continue waiting. I think that would actually spur some real behavior.
And Mitch, one of the things that people will say is that there's a big supply challenge, right? I mean, we have a risk now of higher prices for real estate and fewer homes in the marketplace. So any good government policy has to bring in more choice, more inventory, and the more inventory, that keeps price increases under control. What's your policy hat tell you about the ability of a land transfer tax holiday to bring in more supply into the marketplace?
Yeah, I mean, I think it differentiates based on what metric of success you're trying to look at. So if you're looking at different locations in the province, there may not be different types of homes in that area, or if you're looking at downtown Toronto, your asset classes are very different of what's available. What I think is really interesting about a land transfer tax holiday is, most buyers and sellers are connected. Most people are selling their home and then they're moving into another one. And so when you make the price of purchase cheaper for someone, even if it's down the road, even if they're making money off the sale of their home, it just becomes that much more attractive of an option. So it's encouraging listing throughout the province at the same time that it's also helping demand. And I do look back to what Nick said about first-time home buyers or people who are, really tied up in their finances. This little difference will make a huge amount. It's not so much about helping a millionaire go to a $2 or $3 million home. It's about helping somebody who's got a $400,000 condo to get to that next purchase or that type of sort of smaller escalation in the market. And these savings will really have a huge impact in an immediate basis for those people. So I really do think it stimulates both the supply and demand side of it. And I know some of the work that you've gotten done since has shown that it could create as much as $2.7 billion worth of GDP. And so that stimulus it has a benefit in and of itself of getting the economy back on track, which is one of the things we're trying to do through this paper and through these efforts.
All right, that's very encouraging. We've got both the policy analyst with years of government experience, as well as our broker owner with years of real estate experience, thinking the land transfer tax holiday make a big difference. That's good to hear from both sides. All right, Nick, back to you for a second here. So one thing that I always found interesting was what they call the crosstabs. That's, you look at the top line number of people support an ID or not, but then you look how that breaks down by age, where they live in the province, what party they're likely to vote for. So when you look at those crosstabs on these big policy ideas, Nick, what is most interesting to you as a pollster?
Well, actually, the first thing that's interesting is that a majority of Ontarians, regardless of who they are, where they live, what they do, support these to a certain extent or not. Some of the differences are actually regional, Tim. What we found was that there was less appetite and support for a renovation tax credit in Toronto and the GTA compared to rural areas. So we noticed that significantly. And the other thing is, we talked a little earlier about landlords and how the landlord and tenant relationship works. One of the things that was interesting is that although everyone agreed that landlords should have the flexibility to be able to evict someone for non-payment, one of the things that did pop up was related to financial support of landlords. That supporters, people who self-identified as regularly voting for the Progressive Conservative Party, were less likely to want to financially support landlords in that. So they were good with giving landlords the tools in order to kind of manage their properties, not so good in terms of direct subsidies on that front.
Thanks for saying that, Nick. Let's jump into that. We've not talked about the landlord-tenant issues as of yet. This is a developing problem. Look, I get it. The Premier said, if you pay the rent, then pay the rent. If you can't, you got to feed your family, I understand, and work something with the landlord, but it's gone on months. So Melanie, I'm going to start with you on this one. You have a lot of clients that are caught in this, mom and pop investors who now have a problem tenant or are way behind. And what did you see in Nick's polling that maybe is a sign of a solution for this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that was missing in Premier Ford's message about if you can't pay the rent, don't. was something to the landlords. What happens if you can't pay the mortgage? And we're certainly seeing a lot of our investors that are challenged right now, and the rental market in Toronto is already declining. And so we're seeing, with the landlord tenant board being, essentially closed or on this kind of extremely long break to get anything done. I mean, people are terrified about getting a bad tenant that they can't get out of there. They're not, the mom and pop landlord doesn't want to hurt their tenant who doesn't have a job, but that they still have bills to pay. So I think it's really important that we have some solutions to help those landlords. And at the same time, being able to support the tenants who are in a really tough situation right now. I mean, the landlord board has always favored tenants in Ontario, and that's been really good, but we need to see a little bit more balance, I think.
It's just a pretty tough one, right? I mean, I was in politics and I was a customs officer a while ago, so I've taken on some less popular jobs, but landlords are often seen as sympathetic characters in the media. You've been inside of government for some time. I mean, how would you handle this issue? Because clearly there's a lot of mom and pop landlords who are at risk of losing their investment if something isn't done.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be no surprise to you, Tim, but the advice that I used to give the premier all the time was the most permanent government program was a temporary one, right? Once you do it once, you're not necessarily forced to make a decision to repeal it, and it's very tough to go back on what you've said. So, to Melanie's point, when they made this decision favoring tenants and they didn't put anything in favor of landlords, they need to sort of go back and correct that. And so, if you're going to take away tools in the toolbox, you need to open up other tools. And so what we're saying here is if you're not going to open the landlord and tenant board, let's provide some direct financing to these landlords so that they don't have to default on their mortgage and put their properties up for sale. Because those unintended consequences of the decision are way worse than the first place of perhaps having a tenant who has to move. So government's going to have to step in at some point there, or take the levers off, the shackles off, and allow for more of that traditional market to play itself out. So it is always tough for government to go back and reevaluate a decision like that. But as we get out of mortgage deferrals and as we get further into this pandemic being more of a quasi-permanent thing, we're going to have to make some of those adjustments to get back to a normal society and a normal functioning market.
All right, Mitch, I got a quick one back for you. I've got more questions, but we're getting a ton of questions from those watching at home. And again, please send in your questions to get through as many. So one thing, Nick, you had talked about, to Mitch, you had talked about in your research paper was the home renovation tax credit could take activity out of the black market. Explain exactly what you mean by that.
Yeah, it's a great question. So it shouldn't be a surprise to most people, but a lot of home renovations are done under the table. They're done on cash transactions. And so though that might not pose a risk necessarily for the landscaper or the client, what it does is it fails to give any government revenue. It fails to give any taxation, and it fails to also have all those things that regular employees who are sort of working above board pay into. Things like employment insurance, which in a pandemic has become increasingly important. So for government here, there's a real vested interest to get some of that black market renovation work up into sort of the more legitimate market where, taxes are being processed, because one, that makes it a lot cheaper for government. And two, it helps give those workers a safety net should anything happen to them. So it's better for all parties involved. And depending on the studies you read, it can be anywhere as high as 40% of that landscaping work is done in the black market. So a real opportunity to make this a more cost-effective way for government, at the same time that it also helps people get some money back, because you can't get a tax credit if you don't pay tax on the original purchase and if you don't have a receipt. So of course you're going to have to get above board in order to qualify for that money from government.
Yeah, so when people get renovation done, it creates jobs and the government gets some tax revenue back in return to invest in healthcare or education. All right, let me get you some questions we have from our viewers. So this one is from Will Lenson. Will says, how will we protect our lands as part of the air, water, land, and animal environments amidst an increase in structures, given that Premier Ford has placed open for business above the environment? Wise Progress includes the environment, and our Green Party rep from Guelph has some great ideas. So I thank Will for that question. Melanie, I'll start with you. What do you hear from clients in terms of the balance with the environment and an affordable place to live?
I think people would be, really open to anything that would incentivize them to make their houses more green. I think that's something that a lot of our clients care about.
And how about you, Nick? When you look at the balance on polling where environmental issues are, but also where housing issues are, how does the government strike the proper balance, to Will's question?
Well, the first thing that the government needs to do is to provide certainty in the market, right? The last thing that's, the one thing that's worse for everyone, it doesn't matter where you are in the equation, is the government changing the rules related to, what lands are set aside and what lands are not. And I think the best path forward would be for the government to say, these are our public policy priorities, in terms of affordable housing and access to affordable housing. And here's how they stack up. Here's where we need the development. So, the big message is, don't change the rules. Create a set of rules, stick to them so that people can make decisions, so that developers can make decisions, and so that the market can work.
Ian Hansel, back on the land transfer tax. So Ian says, I'm having a hard time rationalizing a land transfer tax holiday to encourage people into the market when we currently have a supply shortage. So I'll start with Mitch on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the things that need to be considered as to why we're recommending certain different types of policies. What are the problems you're trying to solve? And what you're really trying to solve here is people sitting on their hands, not making those investments that they would have made in a normal time. It's a very realistic and normal reaction. I think we've all done it when the pandemic hit, was we said, okay, I'm going to put my money back in my pocket. I'm not going to make any risky decisions. I'm going to wait for this thing to play out. From a provincial standpoint, that's the worst thing that can happen. I'm reminded of, not to make this as a necessary analogy, but I'm reminded of sort of George Bush after 9/11 saying, the worst thing that we can do is not go out and live our lives. You need to spend money. You need to keep the economy churning. And Ontario is built on real estate. An excessive amount of our economic activity comes from commercial sales and from residential sales, as I'm sure everyone on this call knows. So the real fear here is as mortgage deferrals expire and as those temporary financial assistance programs expire, people just stay where they are. They stay in place. They don't make the decision to have another kid. They don't make the decision to add that home office. They don't make the decision to move out of town and get more space like they've always wanted. So here government is encouraging them to make that decision. And by making it temporary, make it only a 6-month program, you actually have that ability to do it in short order, to stimulate that activity immediately and then reassess. So that's kind of the rationale for it. But it is certainly at first glance, it seems a little counterintuitive. So you definitely have to dig into it a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I live this in our street in North Toronto. There are like 5 other couples with young kids who needed more space. And when they looked at punishing land transfer tax just to move 2 streets over, they all said, forget it. They stayed put and renovated their house. And as a result, that starter home never came on the market. I think an LTT holiday would cause them to move up and open up their homes for some others. And
let's not forget that the LTT is an upfront payment, right? You've got to pay that immediately, whereas a mortgage, you can put some of that on the back end and pay it over time. So for a lot of people who are making those dollars and cents work on their kitchen table to figure out if they can make that move, it will have a demonstrable impact right away.
So let me, this one's a follow-up, I think, to one of Melanie's points when it comes to landlords and the landlord-tenant boards. James Skinderis, and James Melanie says, many mom and pop landlords are concerned about the direction the Residential Tenancy Act has been going the past few years. The legislation has been unfair to landlords, and any attempt to change it has been strongly resisted by radical special interest groups, which are often fueled by the media. The question, Melanie, from James is, what can be done to ensure that small landlords can continue to invest in properties that generate housing supply for the rental market?
Well, that's the big question, right? I mean, how do we keep our landlords comfortable and confident that their rights are protected? And I think one of the challenges we've had during the pandemic has been, I think most landlords understood the rule about not evicting people who couldn't pay their rent because they lost a job. The challenge has really been around the bad tenants, the ones who are, destroying your property and you couldn't get them out and you can't get them out. And I think there really needs to be some pretty quick action on that. I think the time is now, because we are seeing landlords just say, you know what, I'm out. It's been, getting harder and harder to be a landlord for the last 10 years, 20 years. And now I've got someone in my property destroying everything and I have no options. That needs to change pretty quick.
Brad Sylvia has a question. I'm going to start with you, Nick Nanos, on this one. Brad says, demand has been a problem for some time versus supply, which has been a driver of multiple offer scenarios, driving prices up. That's great if you're a seller, but buyers get so frustrated. Nick, Brad Sylvia asks, what can be done to increase supply rather than causing more demand by eliminating the LTT?
Well, one of the things, and I know that there's been research that we've done research on this in the past, is we need, we talk about the province, but let's talk about municipalities for a second. Municipalities have a responsibility to create conditions for them to have the housing that they need. And this includes kind of appropriate zoning, making sure that, that the housing can be built. So, I would say, we've talked a lot about what the progressive conservative provincial government should be doing. We should also be putting on the table that municipalities share a burden in terms of making sure that they do not put obstacles for the creation of affordable housing. And that we should, in addition to talking to the Premier of Ontario and the Minister of Finance, we should be talking to our elected municipal officials and figuring out strategies, community by community, in terms of what works in order to create more affordable housing.
So if I can press you guys, I got some really good questions here. Can we go a bit longer? You good?
Yep.
Sure.
Okay, so I'm gonna start with Melanie on this one, and then Mitch from Strategy Corp. We're gonna ask you to put your policy hat on this and your paper. So Melanie, Vicky Wong says, I believe commercial and office space vacancies will greatly increase. However, to retrofit these spaces is an enormous undertaking. There's limited plumbing, limited electrical in buildings. What strategies do you think would help encourage a conversion of commercial into residential, or do you think that's going to be necessary?
I mean, I think we are going to be seeing, some huge changes in the commercial market. I mean, right now we've got companies that are hanging on and they're paying their rent and they're waiting. I mean, I've got 2 offices and they've been closed since March 12th. I pay my rent every month. I'm hoping that there will be a day where we can open and operate as usual. And I think a lot of people are in that kind of wait and see period. And I'm hoping that means, we're not going to see all the big commercial tenants suddenly leave at the same time. So I hope that it is something that is more gradual. And as we see the increased need for things like wholesaling spaces and, and Amazon and those things, I'm hoping that it's a more gradual change that we'll be able to support, those changes for plumbing or electrical or whatever that's required. Because I think there's also a big opportunity to fix some of our affordable housing problem with some of our vacant commercial space. That's going to be coming up. I think those two can be very, very closely tied together.
All right, Mitch is the Executive Director of the Strategy Corp Institute for Public Policy and the Economy. Is that something that you've put your mind to, the notion that we're not going to be in the office as much? Can we convert that to needed residential spaces?
Yeah, whenever I look at a policy solution that's put forward by people, I want to think about what is the problem that we're trying to solve, and specifically, does that change in different places? So, if we're talking about office building in downtown Toronto, right on top of Union Station, probably always going to be in demand, even if there is a slight dip now. If we're talking about, smaller 4-story office buildings in communities like Peterborough, perhaps we are seeing a fundamental change there. And so when I look at something like that, that's where I think the opportunity zones that you talked about earlier, Tim, are really useful, because here we have an opportunity to say, if you're going to make a conversion like that, if you're going to do any sort of investment in these areas, we'll make it a bit cheaper. And, converting a commercial building to a residential building or to any other type of use, that's going to be expensive. Like you mentioned, there's not a lot of plumbing, or, electrical needs to be reworked. So anything that government can do to reduce that burden, to incentivize an owner of that building, not just to board it up and walk away, but to turn it into something useful. And so I would rather see the government look at those opportunity zones to facilitate investment in those places, rather than something specifically just for commercial to be repurposed. Because I think we're also talking a lot of places, like in my hometown near Barrie, we're talking a lot about small retail, strip malls, plazas, those sorts of things that are also going through a similar period of, can they be repurposed? Are they going to look like something new? And so I really do think that opportunity zone policy is an interesting one for that particular problem.
Okay, Nick, I'm going to come back to you. You do a lot of polling here in the province, a lot on housing, but also at a national level. And a big national issue is immigration. So Mike Montag says, immigration has a direct influence on Ontario's real estate market. Given the numbers are down due to COVID and maybe for some time, where do you think it's going to go with immigration? And how does the panel see this affecting the real estate market? So Nick, where do you think things are going in immigration, and what will it mean for housing?
Well, what we're probably going to see is a slowdown in immigration, because there are just fewer people that are going to want to come from another place to Canada. That also is what that does mean, is that there'll just be less demand. What we find, at least in our research, is that when there are new Canadians, they are more likely to land in high density urban areas, like, let's just say, like Toronto, Ottawa. And so it could have a material impact on those particular markets, but it might make it just a little easier in terms of the supply. That said, In the long term, Canada does need more new Canadians to kind of do those jobs. But I would say with the pandemic right now, with us being in a potential recession/depression, there's just going to be less of an appetite for that.
All right, so let's wrap up at this point in time. We got a lot of questions. Sorry I didn't get to them all, but I got through a good number. And I want to ask each of you to sort of give your main takeaway from where we are today. So I'm going to start with you, Melanie Piche, the owner broker for the Brell real estate team. What's your big message for our over 1,000 realtor audience today?
I think we should all feel that we're fortunate to be, part of a RIA that is taking the time to put together these kinds of policy recommendations. I think we all can see what's, on the horizon. And I encourage everybody to read the full documents and to look at all the Nanos research. There's some fascinating things in there and some really great recommendations to help support this. I think, as realtors, we all see the opportunities for the greater economy of really focusing and supporting housing. So I think we should all really, be informed of what RIA is recommending and really do everything that we can individually to help move some of this forward.
Okay, Mitch Davidson from Strategy Corp. You left government at an interesting time. Now you've started up Strategy Corp's a think tank, so to speak, with the Institute. What's your main lesson for those watching at home today?
Yeah, I think, the pandemic, the way that I've kind of taken as a rule of thumb is the pandemic has accelerated trends that were existing, right? So whether that's working from home or online shopping or lots of other things that were existing in society, the pandemic's accelerated them. One of them that I think is true and really was eye-opening from a lot of Nick's research is the dream of home ownership. I would say it's become even more wanted and desired by the general public. And that's something that the pandemic has uniquely positioned in this space that I don't think was necessarily true before. So if I were to leave it with one thought, it's yeah, we've got a lot of particular measures here to make sure that the economy is chugging along and recovering, but let's not forget about the long-term supply fixes that are needed because people are going to want homes and that's not going to go away anytime soon. In fact, they might just want them more.
Outstanding. Okay, Nick Nanos, President Nanos Research, your big takeaway.
My big takeaway, back in March, there were some nervous Nellies about realtors, the future of realtors and real estate. Well, you know what? None of that has come to pass. People still have confidence in the market. They're still out there buying. And you know what? Realtors are becoming even more important in this COVID scenario. And to Mitch's point, what we're seeing is a change in the marketplace because before, a home is where you lived and you usually worked someplace else. No more. Realtors, developers, everyone take note. Realtors need to adapt, the market needs to adapt, and the government needs to create an environment for this new reality of work, home in one place.
Fantastic. I want to thank all of our panelists. Awesome job. Melanie Piche, the owner, broker, the Brell team. Thanks so much for joining us again on the RIA Consumer Market Perceptions when it comes to COVID. Fantastic job. Mitch Davidson, thank you for your research and being a first-time panelist for us here at RIA. Great to see how your policy graphs come to play on these issues and continued success at Strategy Corp, Institute for Public Policy and the Economy. And of course, Nick Nanos, a longtime partner of RIA, giving us the numbers, what people are thinking in the market. We'll look forward to your next set of numbers for October. Folks, thank you very much. And all those watching at home, thank you for the awesome questions. Sorry to get them all, but there were some really good ones in there. Appreciate your attention. Stay tuned for our next broadcast. Those that missed it, let them know about it. This is going to be streamed at the RIA COVID19info.com website momentarily, and also all of Nick's numbers. It's already up on the website for you to use. Folks, thanks very much. All the best for a very successful fall. Thanks for tuning in.